So it's past 2:30. We have a quorum. Drew, if you could call the roll and then give our teleconference disclosures, please.
Good afternoon, directors. We'll be starting with Director Melanie Bagby, who I don't see in the room yet. Director Janice Cater-Thompson.
Present.
Director Chris Corsi. Here. Director Patricia Farrar-Rivas.
Here.
Director Gerard Giudice.
Here.
Director Susan Harvey.
Here.
Director Ariel Kelly.
Here.
Director David Rabbit.
Here.
Director Rosa Reynosa.
Here.
Director Stephen Zolman.
Present.
Vice Chair Hopkins.
Present.
And Chair Rogers.
Here.
And we have no board members on teleconference at the moment.
Great. Let's go on then to public comment for items not on our agenda. You have the comment on something that is within SCTA and RCPA's jurisdiction, but not on the agenda. Go ahead and approach the podium.
Thank you.
Mr. DeWitt.
My name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. I wanted to thank you folks for, again, having in-person public participation at these meetings. It's a very good thing to have the public involved. This body, I believe, has some good intentions, and I wanted to let you folks know that I have good intentions too. Over a quarter of a century ago, some folks were putting a book together called The Voices of Hope in the Struggle to Save the Planet. It's a faith-based book that came out at the turn of the century, and it basically talks about things, and it gives a term called ecotheology. It looks at all the different, not all, but many different spiritual disciplines throughout the world and how they've looked at what nature might be. One of the things that's important, especially for a body like this, which is trying to do some good things, but actually works with the engine of development and the growth machine that goes on in this larger community. And there's something called ecological principles in practice. And so when I come forward, it's because I'm coming forward with that view of ecology and environmentalism. I'm an unabashed tree hugger. Been doing it all my life. I will continue to do it until I die. It's an important thing that we have that in our discussions that go on. And one of the things that's really important, I think, is that you folks get the opportunity to look back 50 years ago. That's when the University of Wisconsin put together an Institute of Environmental Studies ran by a guy named Cal DeWitt. No relation to me, but I paid attention ever since because he had the same name. I thought, wow, let's check this out. He's been doing wonderful stuff with an organization called the Au Institute. Been pointing out how if we're going to do anything geared towards actually saving our environmental situation, ecological principles have to guide the decisions that come from governmental agencies such as yourself. You folks get a lot of dough coming your way and you're making these decisions. So ecological principles. I'm also a respiratory therapist. I worry about pollution. Did you know that this weekend we're having a monster truck show here in Santa Rosa? Big trucks, lots of pollution coming out there. It's sanctioned. It's going on. It's going to happen. Those are the kind of things that you got to balance. Some of my veterans groups put together car shows. I'm going to pass you around this little flyer. All American car shows. People still like driving American cars that use up gas. You folks are in the business of what you might call behavioral modification. You're going to try to figure it out, how you're going to get those people out of those gas using cars, how you're going to make positive things happen. I'm going to pass this out now because I'm seeing you all watch the clock. I'm watching the clock too. And I know you only get 3 minutes to try to save this world in front of a governmental agency, but here you go. Giving one to your executive director.
If you want to give the rest to Drew, Drew can distribute them to the board also.
I was just going to hand them to this guy right here.
That works. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
It's all good.
We have
Looking
it.
forward to speaking with you on the next item also.
All right, do we have any other public comments for non-agenda items, Drew?
I'm currently not seeing any members of the public on Zoom wishing to speak on this item.
All right, let's go on to our consent calendar then. We have a number of items. First, we have our meeting notes from April 10th. We have the establish and adopt financial policies for administration of the RCPA. We have a resolution of commendation for Dennis Battenberg and we're going to go ahead and talk about that one in just a moment. We have our quarterly financial report, our cooperative funding agreement for mitigation monitoring plan, and we have our project and program management service task order. Are there any questions from folks on the consent calendar? Suzanne, did you want to say something about item 4.3?
I would, and so would Dana Troy, if that's okay. So Dennis Battenberg, who's on the line remotely with us today, served as chair of the Paratransit Coordinating Committee since 1993. He has been such a pleasure to work with and a true advocate for people with disabilities and how the transit system really needs to be there for him. And it's just, I can't believe the amount of time he's dedicated to the work that we do here. And it's just been a pleasure to work with him.
Thank you. And yeah, I would just like to say thank you to Dennis for serving as chair for so long. I had to go look through some very old binders that and very old print to figure out how long he had actually been serving on the committee. And he's just always been very dedicated to showing up and bringing good questions and topics to the committee. So we appreciate his service as chair for so many years.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions, comments from the board? Great, let's go to public comment. And Dennis, if you'd like to say a few words, we'll go ahead and start with you. And if not, that's absolutely fine as well.
We're going to unmute the phone. Okay. Got 2 layers of mute for this one. My apologies on that.
I don't know, maybe there are other comments.
Yeah. In the meantime, we'll see if there are other public comments. Mr. DeWitt, come on up.
Dwayne DeWitt from Roseland. The point of clarification in the minutes from the last meeting, I spoke on item 4.4, and I specifically referenced that it was Dutton Avenue that had the bikeway put on at the corner of Barham Avenue. A proposal for 2 affordable houses that had been approved while I was on the Waterways Advisory Committee for Santa Rosa was knocked out. Talked out to the developer, and he said the city forced him to give up the 2 affordable housing units for 50 feet of a bike path on a road that people don't use for bikes. So we have to balance this, and you folks should check into this on your own. It's all on public record. So at least let your minutes show that it's development on Dutton Avenue, the corner of Barham Avenue. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely, we can make that amendment. Drew or Dana? We good, or should we just keep going?
We might have to keep going. Yeah.
All right,
The phone's ringing. It's muted, but-
no problem. We'll just make sure, Dennis, that you know how grateful we are for your service and for all of the work that you've done in the community. And thank you so much, and well-deserved retirement and stepping away from the board. I'll bring it back to the board. Are there any additional questions, or can I get a motion, please?
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion from Director Harvey and a second from Director Rabbit. Point of clarification with the correction that Mr. DeWitt presented.
With Mr. DeWitt's correction.
Good with the second?
Yeah.
Great. Let's go ahead and take a roll call vote then. Actually, I guess because we don't have any, yeah.
All board members are present in person, so we can be unanimous.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. Show unanimous approval. Let's move on to item 5.1, please.
All right.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and directors. I'm going to start out the presentation on this item and then hand it over to Suzanne to cover the polling item. So, got the slides. All right, great. So I'm going to start off with just a quick update or overview on the most recent public meeting that we held for the Climate Protection Initiative, which was on April 19th. So if you can go to the next slide, Ross. And then, as I mentioned, I'll turn it over to Suzanne to talk about the poll, and then we'll close with next steps. So you can go to the next slide, Russ. So as I mentioned, we had the workshop on April 19th. It was very well attended. It was a Zoom only meeting, so no in-person attendance at this one. And it was our opportunity to give our first kind of full public update on the work of the 3 program committees, the Land and Water, Buildings and Transportation Committee. And we opened the meeting with remarks from Congressman Jared Huffman, who talked about the importance of the climate efforts that we're undertaking and some of the history of RCPA and how we were created. The program leads that then went through a high-level presentation of their project lists, and we have all of the details from this public meeting as well as the detailed project lists posted online for those who want to take a look in more depth. But in the interest of time at the meeting, we couldn't go through the entire list in great detail. Then we took the opportunity to get some feedback from members of the public using a live Zoom polling option, and I'll share the results from those polls with you here in a moment. And also provided live Spanish interpretation and bilingual Zoom polls. And we had over 100 people in attendance. So next, I'd like to give just a little bit of background. And the next couple slides are ones that we shared during the public meeting. So with our countywide measure to fund climate protection that we're working on here, we had kind of 3 main program goals that we've been working with. One obviously is to reduce carbon pollution as fast as possible to meet our goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. Second is to adapt to the negative effects of climate change that we're already feeling in Sonoma County, like the fires, the floods, the drought, et cetera. And then to benefit all residents in an equitable and efficient way in all of the work that we're doing here. Next slide, please. And so here you see the 3 main initiative areas that our committees have been focused on. And as the committees went through their work in terms of brainstorming and identifying potential projects, they came up with the 3 that you see in the umbrella there that were kind of cross-cutting project ideas. And so we wanted to recognize that they really cut across all 3 areas. So they were in the categories of equity, workforce training, and public education. And then you see in the boxes below that our buildings committee is focused on electrification and resilience improvements in the built environment. Then our transportation committee has really been focused on the biking, walking, and transit use. And the EVs, in case you're curious or haven't heard the buildings presentation, they've really been looking at the EV infrastructure that's needed to support our rapid adoption of electric vehicles. And then the third category is the land and water, which is really looking at our working and developed lands, as well as water and other resilience projects. Next slide, please. And so these are just a couple of examples from those cross-sector areas, in case you're kind of wondering, what does that mean? So in terms of equity, really looking at higher incentives in all of the areas that we're working in for our lower income and most vulnerable populations. Other ideas that came up here, things like outdoor worker protections, and then a recognition just in general that we need to do a lot more workforce training to have the workforce to work on the EVs and to install the heat pump water heaters and all of those updates that we need to make, as well as public education to really build support for the changes that are needed. Next slide, please. And so the next 3 slides share the results from the Zoom polling that we did. And as I mentioned, we have the detailed project list posted online and can share them with all of you if you want to take a look at them. And in the poll, we asked which 3 options members of the public would most strongly support. And so here is the result from the Transportation Committee projects. And you can see that improving and expanding bikeways and walkways came out on the top of the list in terms of what most people supported. And then going lower in terms of support, extending hours of transit service, improving the amenities related to transit, like increasing the frequency of the buses, and then increasing programs that improve access to transit, such as reduced or free fares, school buses, on-demand types of transit solutions, et cetera. And then kind of to the least voted on was improving transit vehicles and amenities for sustainability and better user experience, kind of ranked the lowest. And the way that, I should step back a moment and say, the way that the program committees came up with these lists is they really looked at all of the detailed projects and tried to group them into natural groupings. So we don't want to lose any of that rich input that we received, but in terms of giving folks something to kind of look at and vote on, we boiled it down to these reduced number of categories. Next slide, please. So here are the buildings committee projects, how folks rated them. Again, we asked them to choose the three that they most strongly supported. And here you can see a real strong level of support for offering extra assistance in this transition to electrification of our buildings for, again, our most vulnerable residents, low income households, et cetera. And then next up was augmenting existing incentive and financing. So we've had a fair amount of discussion in this committee about there are programs like through BayRen, Sonoma Clean Power, et cetera, that offer incentives and rebates. And we really need to expand or amplify those so that they're more accessible to a broader range of our community. And then you see electric vehicle charging there and really focused near multifamily housing, recognizing that folks who have their own homes and garages, it's easier for them to install charging than say someone living at an apartment complex. And so that's really where we need to focus our efforts, or at least that's what the committees are recommending, focusing our efforts around those multifamily dwellings. So that was the buildings committee. And then the third is the land and water committee. And so here you can see the most the most popular item was to support regenerative agricultural practices and carbon farming techniques. So techniques like applying compost to soil, implementing or installing hedgerows, and a number of other farming techniques that have been proven to increase the sequestration of carbon into our soils. And then expanding natural land enhancement and watershed restoration was another very popular item. Actually, there's kind of four there that fell out towards the top. Forest conservation and restoration is also something that we've heard a fair amount of feedback on the importance of that. The other thing that I should mention here is that during the meeting, we received a number of inputs, both questions as well as inputs in terms of additional project ideas that we should consider for inclusion. And so our program committees and staff are working through all of that feedback, and we'll make sure that that gets incorporated into these lists for the next time that we're reviewing them. But this is just the results from the meeting itself. So that, I think, was all I wanted to share on the meeting on the 19th. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Suzanne to talk about the polling and next steps.
Okay, great. So we have Jessica from EMC Research with us today, and EMC has done polling for the SCTA RCPA in the past. They did research in 2019 and 2020 leading up to the Go Sonoma measure. And so we've talked with them about a scope of work to produce a poll for us for the climate measure. So Jessica is here today to run through some information about their proposal. And so the item today kind of has two parts. The part Tanya just went through with the content discussion that the board should have following the presentation. And then we're asking your consideration to approve a contract with EMC to perform the work. The contract is for actually 2 polls. We can do the first one, and then if we want to do another one next year, they will be under contract to perform that work as well. So with that, I will turn it to Jessica.
Thank you so much. So just a brief presentation prepared today, really just to run through kind of the process, the proposed timeline, the proposed methodology, and give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have about this process. So really a brief presentation for you. I'll start with the next slide and introduce you a little bit to EMC Research. We've worked with the county since 2003, so I've had the honor of working with a few of you in the past. We are a majority women-owned opinion research firm. From quantitative to qualitative to analytics. And we are a national firm, but we do bring together a team that provides kind of boutique level services at the local level. And I'm getting a note that my internet is unstable, so please reach out or chat me if I'm not coming through clearly. So on the next slide, the purpose of the project, as outlined, really just briefly, it's going to be a scientifically valid survey of likely voters in the county to help determine the feasibility of a potential measure for 2024 on climate action, resilience, and preparedness in Sonoma County. So the survey will be designed to provide you with an overview of the county's voters and their opinions, an assessment of the likelihood of success or the feasibility of a climate action measure, and then some informational pieces, so some suggested information on how the public can better understand what the measure would do and how it would affect the community. So EMC Research is proposing to work with you to provide research-based recommendations on the feasibility of a measure, the structure of a measure, timing, and other key strategic decision points. So on the next slide, a brief overview of the methodology that we proposed. We did propose a multimodal methodology that incorporates both live telephone interviews on cell phones and landlines, along with online interviews by email and text invitation to likely voters in the county. We're proposing a total of 800 interviews at an average of 15 minutes each in English and Spanish languages. On the next slide, just wanted to give a brief overview of what you can learn from this kind of research. So what we hope to bring back to you with the poll results is an assessment of voters' priorities, awareness of revenue needs related to climate action, resilience, and preparedness. We'd like to be able to answer the questions around what is the appropriate amount, structure, and timing for a measure. What is, of course, is the level of support for and likelihoods of success of a measure today? What are the types of projects that are most important to those who will vote? And then what are the messages or pieces of information that best convey the benefits of a measure to the community? So on the next slide, an overview of how we see the process working. Step one being gathering information. So we've done a little bit of that and we'll continue doing that as things progress. Step two, the question and answer session about the survey process. That's where we are today. Step three will be to go and develop a survey draft in collaboration with a smaller designated group. Once we go back and forth on a draft and all parties sign off, we would then conduct the survey and analyze the results, develop recommendations, and then bring the findings of the research along with recommendations back to you. And then we're there to assist with next steps and provide ongoing consultation on the research results. And this final slide just shows a brief outline of where we imagine the timeline will be for this project. So starting next week with approval to move forward, we would start developing the questionnaire drafts in anticipation of conducting interviews towards the end of the month in early June. And then we would bring results back in early July. So with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, I'll look to the board to see if there are any questions. Director Reynosa.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if in past surveys or if in this survey, if you ever asked the question, how will you rate this compared to other measures being proposed? Because I'm concerned there's going to be a lot of measures out there on the 2024 ballot. So people will pick and choose which one. So I'm just wondering if that could be a potential question. Because when you look at a standalone, you know, but then when you're looking at a whole line of slew of things to vote on all together side by side, they might choose one over another. Thank you.
Absolutely. And one of the things we do try to understand through the research are what are kind of top priorities among voters these days. Typically, you know, certainly we can't present the entire ballot, especially for 2024 in a given poll, if we want to be able to get enough information on this specific measure. So we can't, you know, test every measure that's going to be out there. What we can do is try and understand a couple of things. One, you know, as I mentioned, what are local voter priorities and where do the outcomes of this measure stack up against other kind of priorities that are that we know voters have. Along with kind of an assessment of tax sensitivity. So we try to gauge the sentiment that I would vote against any tax right now, regardless of what it's for. So we try to really understand level of sensitivity to taxes at this point in time. And those, we put the pieces together to try and help understand the feasibility of this as a potential measure. We also, you know, have done this kind of research on potential ballot measures for a very long time. And we've seen historically that other measures don't tend to necessarily impact, this isn't 100% true, but don't tend to necessarily impact the measure at hand as much as we think they might, because typically we don't see that voters see a ballot as kind of which ones will I select? It's more of a values-based question. So what we really try to understand is, do voters value this measure enough to support it, or do they not? And if they do value it, typically we will be able to understand the feasibility of the measure itself without having to test every other measure that's out there on the ballot.
Thank you.
Director Bagby?
Yeah, thank you. Rosa kind of beat me to my question, but if I,
Speak into
is
the.
that not sounding okay? It looks like it's on. Are we on? There we go. Okay, don't be afraid of the microphone. Yeah, Rosa alluded to my question more specifically, on one of my other hats that I wear on the smart board. I'm just wondering if you could kind of expand on if there were two measures that seem really similar, does one or both endanger the other, which I think you kind of address, but I just want to talk specifically about the climate implications of SMART needing to go out for reauthorization, either now or at some future date. And I'm just wondering, I'm conflating the two, but I think I'm hearing something similar in the questions that were asked on the survey in the town hall, and some of the questions that I think we're going to ask, potentially in this survey. I think one of the challenges that I see, one of the difficulties, is that we're asking very specific questions. We're not asking systems oriented questions. That are, and we don't ask them because they're really complicated. They're complicated for people who are steeped in them and address them every day. So I'm just wondering if you can answer the question. It's like, how deep can you go, or how specific can you go with questions before they almost become meaningless in the larger transportation and climate and in the larger context of what we're trying to accomplish as policymakers. How do we tease some meaning out of that? Does that make sense, Jessica?
I think so. I think I heard a couple different kind of overarching questions. One being, what if there are two very similar measures on the ballot that are sort of trying to accomplish similar things? In that case, if we know there might be two measures that are quite similar, we could certainly test them both in one poll, or we could, sort of get at reasons for support, reasons for opposition. There are ways that we can kind of break apart a given measure to try and understand what are the pieces that are really driving support, maybe driving opposition, what are specific vulnerabilities. So every circumstance is certainly different, and we want to consider all of the, all of the information that we have incoming to us in developing the poll and design of the poll to try and make sure we're answering as many questions that we can and bringing back good recommendations to you. So it's something we'll have to consider really carefully during the design process. And then to your question around how do we really describe these kinds of projects or outcomes in layperson terms? I mean, that's a really great question, because of course we can't make the survey so long that no one will want to take it, because our goal, of course, is to design a survey that is representative of the likely voters. So we really have to be very succinct, very focused, and describe things in language that is understandable to the broad likely voter audience. And so we know voters, are going to be asked to pay attention to so many different things. We're going to have limited attention on any one issue. So we really try to drill down and distill all of those kind of complicated projects into the most simple language that we can think of that describes the outcome And also really stay focused during the design of the survey on what we think are those kind of top 10 projects that we're going to want to talk about and highlight, because we can't talk about them all, right? We don't have that level of attention from voters. So we'll really want to work hard to make sure we're including just those kind of top priority items and make sure we describe them in a way that's understandable. And that's what we do during the poll design process. And then we can come back to you with results that say, if we only have time to mention 3 outcomes, what should those 3 things be that we should highlight?
That is, I think you got my very murky question. You made some sense out of it, so thank you. And just to kind of clarify, just one of my concerns, and what I'd like to see us tease out is that, we're asking questions about, gee, do you like bikes? And of course, well, who doesn't like a bike? I mean, but what I am interested in hearing from the voters is there an appetite or an understanding of, yes, the people who support SMART and use SMART, or even just know that it has, or a regional benefit, do support it. But I think that one of the hardest things to understand is the power that it gives cities to engage in city-centered development. And that's not, are you going to ride the train next week? That's a decades-long challenge that we need to get across. And it's not just, it's the decades-long challenge because it's going to take years and decades for us to respond in a development with development that actually takes advantage of it. But it's also the piece of yes to bikes, yes to electric cars, yes to all of the things that create the network that actually enable cities and our county to move the needle on greenhouse gas emissions. So I don't know how to articulate that. I'm hoping that you can find a way to do that. So but if you want to comment on that, but that's the crux of my question.
Yeah, thank you. It is just a good reminder. It's a complex issue, a lot of pieces to take into consideration. It will be a challenge, but one that I think we're prepared to take on to try and really turn the issue into language that we can test and then bring back to you, so that we give you some, even if we see poll results that say we're not seeing the level of support we might have hoped, even still, we can give some good advice on, okay, when it comes to talking about this issue, here's how here are the things that seem to resonate and seem to be important to people, versus these things which seem to be too complicated for them to understand, or they need to understand this before they understand that, or things like that. So we'll try and bring some information back to you that's helpful in how do we talk about this issue.
Great, thank you.
Director Zolman?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to lift up the recommendation from a number of leaders from the Sebastopol Climate Action Committee. Their proposed comment, well, the comment that they submitted last Friday, wanted to see about adding the question of whether there's an appetite to include a Charles Schultz Airport climate fee. And they stated the reasons why they were interested in doing it. Number one, that they saw it as being a more equitable approach than the 3 approaches under consideration, which are sales tax, parcel tax, and vehicle registration fees. They also indicate the fact that the Schultz Airport is past due for review, and also to explore a higher climate fee for private air traffic at the Schultz Airport. So I just wanted to lift up that public comment and recommendation.
Oh, thank you. Director Farrar Rivas?
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Director Zolman had the same question or comment that I did. Thank you.
Perfect. Director Giudice?
Thanks. Well, for me, eye on the prize, right? This is really important for RCPA to get this thing across the finish line. And there's going to be a number of opportunities for the board to review this. And I think as we craft the revenue measure, that's going to be very important. But in terms of this survey, I think we need to ask the questions that will best get us the best possible results that we want to hear. So in other words, framing the question so that we're showing the voters that it's a improvement in the quality of life, and kind of keeping it more high, not getting bogged down in the weeds on this. And then the hard work, will begin after that. But if we want to get the results that we want and move forward on this very important initiative, I think we need to keep the questions not, don't go down those rabbit holes, in my opinion, and let's make sure we get a positive overwhelmingly positive response. And I think with this particular issue, there are some easy ways to do that.
Any other questions from the board? Director Kelly?
I think with respect to polling and how the language will be constructed around funding for a climate change measure, is the method, whether it's sales tax, parcel tax, airport tax, is that part of what the poll will include? And is there inputs being sought at this point from this body as to the directions what directions we want to include in that? Or are you intending to keep all doors open to hear from the subjects of the poll and then you'll report back on the findings? And is an airport tax something that's being considered in the poll?
Mr. Chair, if I could, the airport tax issue, we asked attorneys last week to provide feedback on the viability of that. And there are federal laws prohibiting anything but a facility charge that has to be used at the airport for very prescribed levels of work. So that is not a viable funding mechanism to do climate work outside of doing work at the airport itself. I can get you a more detailed email on what the answer to that question was that I did share with Stephen late Friday. So I will send that to the board as well. But I know I've got 3 supervisors here who probably know way more about the airport than I do, but that was our understanding from our legal team's perspective.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, let's go to public comment. Mr. DeWitt, you're up.
Thanks, sir. Hello, Dwayne DeWitt from Roseland. There's close to 500,000 people living in Sonoma County now. This Zoom meeting that was held, I'm not a Zoomer, so I wasn't a part of that, but you had 100 people. Think about that, 100 people. And that's what you're basing a lot of your ideas upon. What frequently happens with the Zoom community is the echo chamber effect. People who already are involved in something get on there to hear each other's opinions about what they like. I really believe that if you look at the Press Democrat, I'm old school, I read the old newspaper. There was a recent article in there where this was mentioned. And it was basically, people were like, well, we don't necessarily know if we want another tax. So I understand you folks want another tax. And I understand some of the ideas you talk about. The one I understand best of all is tax sensitivity. And there's a lot of people in this county who feel that we're already up at the top for sales tax. And that this is nationwide, one of the highest sales tax ever, that you really should be looking at something else. So how about transit occupancy tax? I got a card here from a boutique hotel, a serene retreat in the urban heart of wine country. There you go. Lots of these people rolling in here. They're willing to spend hundreds of dollars a night to hang out and do what they do. So they're actually contributing to our pollution load. And I think that's where you ought to be looking for your money and not necessarily going to these beleaguered people out here, especially the ones that are working in the landscaping industries or in the construction industries using their trucks. You go by houses in my neighborhood, they got 4, 5, and 6 vehicles per household because that's how they're making their living. And they're going to look at these recommendations you come up with and go like, oh, that might be fine and dandy, but I got to still make my money. And they're not as tuned into the climate adaptation approaches that you might be discussing. So I would ask you to reach out to even more than the 800 interviews that are going to be done by this group. I believe you'll get, possibly in a presidential election, at least 150,000 voters out there. You need to convince 76,000 of them to get your tax measures one way or the other, probably. So I'm hoping that you folks will look at this in I guess you might call it a more mercenary approach to go after those who come visit us here to help pay the way on the pollution that they bring in. I would have thought that airport tax was great. Too bad you can't do it.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeWitt. Come on up.
Hello, Stephen Pierce, Sebastopol, City of Sebastopol Climate Action Committee Funding Task Force. And as was mentioned earlier, I sent a letter last Friday and thank you for getting back to me so quickly on the federal government's ridiculous ideas around any kind of revenue measure that would involve airports whatsoever. I did want to mention a couple things about the airport. It's already exceeding their forecasted 2030 passenger count. And by the county's own standards, it needs a review by the Board of Supervisors. As far as the RCPA goes, we really need to start including airport emissions in our greenhouse gas inventory assessment, as the ICLEI US Community Protocol version 1.2 requires. More equitable choices for funding measures are, according to the County Council, not within the authority of the Climate Resiliency District that we're all talking about funding. Funding options such as the TOT that was just mentioned, or business license fees, or utility users taxes where CARE and FARA customers are exempt, they're all off limits. This County Council opinion most likely means that we are primarily looking at sales taxes to fund our efforts. And this unfortunately means that even if we pass this tax measure and do these wonderful things that we want to do, future climate resiliency districts will look at our funding mechanism and they'll question that model and say, that's not very equitable. I'm not really sure about these climate resiliency districts. If that's how we have to fund it, where poor people who are spending like 3 to 4 times as % of their income on sales taxes as compared to the very wealthy. Of the 3 funding choices left to us between sales taxes, parcel taxes, and vehicle license fee, the parcel tax is the most equitable. There was some discussion in the meeting last month about a senior exemption because it would be easier to pass if we exempt seniors. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about that. There are certainly school board parcel taxes, 5 of the 8 that listed on our websites. They do have senior exemptions. There are quite a few of our health districts, fire districts, the mosquito and vector control. There's no senior exemption. The older generations in Sonoma County has a disproportionate share of the property wealth in our county. We shouldn't exempt seniors. Hey, 40 years, we've known this climate crisis, and we really need, the older generation has failed us.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Any additional comments on Zoom?
Yes, I see Tom Conlon. Tom, I'm permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Tom Conlon here in Sonoma Valley, speaking as an individual. I appreciate the presentation on the survey methods, and I'm still eager to hear an answer to the question several board members asked, which has been kind of reiterated in some of the public comment as well, about whether the method of taxation will be a focus of this survey. I think it would be very valuable to get a sense for where the populace is right now on these different methods of raising revenue by local governments. There's been a fair amount of talk in several of the different meetings, the subgroup meetings, about the very successful Portland program, the Portland taxation program, which was very popular up there, which essentially passed a business license tax on large retailers, a very small segment of the business community but was able to raise a significant amount of money for the city of Portland. And I know there's been some interest in that, but I haven't seen any serious feasibility study of that. At our Climate Action Advisory Committee meeting, I think it was a week or so ago, several members of the public on that commission asked for some clear delineation of these different methods and the legality of each, the limits on what each could raise, equitability issues, and the like. My sense is that the board still does not have anything terribly clear in front of you to make a good decision about this. And I think it would be premature to go out into the field with a survey if we don't really have a clear sense of what those different things are, those different methods. So especially the parcel versus the sales tax, those seem to be the two concepts most in fashion right now. But also the possibility of some targeted business taxes. And the other area, because this is such a tourism dependent economy here in Sonoma County, I would love to see surveying on the question of whether the public is ready to support the redirection of transient occupancy taxes to climate action, and where that falls within the range of public priorities right now. So I don't know if that's the third rail here politically in Sonoma County, but I do think that we should anticipate that if there's not widespread support for the measure, we could end up exposing ourselves to the possibility that it wouldn't pass. And I think that would be tragic for all. So those are my comments for today. I hope you take them into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
I don't see any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item, Chair Rogers.
Great. I'll go ahead and bring it back. And to answer the question about the types of taxation, we do have the option of asking the pollster to sort of split it into different samples. Suzanne, if you want to talk about this a little bit, where we could have one sample that was specific to property tax, one sample that was specific to sales tax. I know we don't want to dilute it too far, so we'd want to pick maybe two max, but I think there is that option there.
Yeah, that's my understanding, and Jessica is still on, so maybe you could speak to the split sample option.
Absolutely. Yes, that's exactly right as you describe, to test one mechanism against another in order to gather unbiased feedback on each option. What we typically do is that split sample methodology. So all of the 800 respondents are kind of randomly assigned to hear one or the other. And so we can look at response to a potential sales tax measure and compare it to response to a potential parcel tax measure. And as you mentioned, if we start asking about additional mechanisms beyond those two, we get a little bit of we have a challenge in interpreting the results, because either we have to do a three-way split and have three different conditions, and then we have to grapple with a larger margin of error on each option. Or we ask individual respondents about more than one mechanism, which typically will get some order effects or some bias based on which one they heard first. So if we can home in on two potential mechanisms for testing in the survey, that would be ideal.
Great, thank you. Question from Director Corsi.
Yeah, a couple questions. And I guess I would probably be biased on the taxes that I don't pay too. So Suzanne, anyone's from staff, I think I need a reminder from our last meeting about why business tax was not one of the viabilities that was brought forward. And also, can you remind us of the discussion of the sales tax ceiling that some jurisdictions are approaching?
Let me start with that one. There is a sales tax cap. And right now, the two jurisdictions that are closest to the cap are within 3/4 of a cent away from the cap. So what that means is if one of them were to do an additional tax measure that would put them close to the cap, that would limit what we could do countywide. Or if there were other countywide measures before this measure went to the ballot, it would limit the number of tax measures that could be approved. My understanding is if there are multiple tax measures on the ballot at the same time that get approved, that it then cause the cap to be exceeded, then none of them pass. So that's another additive to the discussion.
And Suzanne, can we get you to really get close to your mic?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that folks on Zoom can hear you.
And so that's the cap issue, that we're 0.75% away from the limit that's allowable. There's also, of course, a cap on what people are willing to pay, and that's something, you know, you try and suss out with the polling as well. In terms of the types of measures, utility taxes, business fees, tourism taxes are all within the jurisdiction of cities or the county. And so not something that we have the authority as a climate resilience district to implement countywide.
I remember that now. Thank you. All right. So what we're looking for today is direction, both approval of the timeline that was laid out from our polling research firm, as well as authorization for the executive committee to work with the pollster to make sure that we craft the specifics of the questions. Is there anything additional that you need, Suzanne?
No, I apologize. My mic was off. No, I don't believe there's.
And the appropriations of the funds to work. with
Yes,
the
and
pollster.
just to clarify on the contract, so the term of the contract is through the end of 2024. The not to exceed amount is $100,000. The first poll we anticipate costing about $50,000, depending on whether it's a 600 sample size or 800 sample size. And we are grateful to the County of Sonoma and the PG&E settlement funds, as that will be funding the first poll.
Great. So I'll look for a motion.
So moved, Rabbit.
Motion by Director Rabbit,
Second.
second from Director Bagby. Is there any additional discussion from the board? Go ahead, Director Kelly.
Was there a determination that we are going to be parsing it out into two separate sample groups so that we can test the tax type?
Yeah, I think we'll work with the pollster, the executive board will, to figure out the best way to approach that. But my understanding from just hearing the interest from the board is that we would like to do that.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Any additional discussion? Great. Drew, can you call the vote, please? I guess we don't need to do that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Man, it feels good to be normal. So that passes. So we'll go on to our next item. That's item 5.2. I will give the board and the public heads up, though, that with the budget later in the agenda, we have a requirement of having 8 directors here for approval of the budget. So I'm going to do a time certain right around 4 o'clock where we'll switch to the budget item, which is item 5.6. If we are not yet there at 4 o'clock, make sure we get the budget taken care of today and then go back to additional items. If not, we'll come back to those items later, or some might need to be moved to another agenda if we run too late with council members leaving.
Right, good afternoon, directors. The item before you is the proposed program of projects for our annual Transportation Development Act, Article 3 program. These funds are set aside from a portion of state sales tax that are dedicated to bicycle and pedestrian projects. And SCTA allocates Transportation Development Act, Article 3 funds to Sonoma County jurisdictions based on their portion of the population. Matching funds are not required for this program, and any unused entitlement is rolled over into the next year's program. So the total funding available for fiscal year 23-24 in Sonoma County was about 1.6 million. And this year we received applications for 5 projects totaling roughly $539,000. Several submittals this year requested matching funds for larger projects, and we have 5 projects in the program. These include the Crocker Bridge bike and pedestrian passage, matching funds for the county, Bodega Bay Bike and Pedestrian Trail, North Coast Harbor for county regional parks, sidewalk repair and gap closure in Healdsburg, matching funds for the active transportation plan in Petaluma, and rectangular rapid flashing beacon installations in Santa Rosa. This program of projects was recommended by our countywide bicycle and pedestrian advisory board committee in March. And with that, I would recommend the board approve this program and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much. I do want to give a big thank you to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee that worked so diligently on this. And then I'll open it up and see if there are any questions from the board. Let's go and see if there's any public comments on this. I see none in the room. Drew, any online?
There are no public comment on Zoom at this moment, Chair.
Perfect. All of our folks did such a phenomenal job. Nobody has any questions. I'll look then for a motion from the board. So I heard a motion from Director Rabbit, second from Director Harvey. Drew, go, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And we pass. Thank you. Let's move to item 5.3.
Afternoon, Chair and Directors. Item 5.3 is the fiscal year 23-24 Transportation Fund for Clean Air program of projects. And similar to the previous item, we received 5 applications from the jurisdictions and transfer operators for this funding source. By board policy, funding is set aside for the 3 bus operators, Sonoma County Transit, Santa Rosa City Bus, and Honolulu Transit. In this case, the amount for Santa Rosa City Bus was reduced due to not being able to use the full amount, and so that was shifted to the competitive portion of the funds. We received 2 competitive applications, one from the city of Petaluma and one from SCTA. And to fit within the available funding amount, we worked with both Petaluma staff and SCTA staff to fit the available funds. With that, staff is recommending that you approve the program projects for approximately $657,522 for the 5 projects. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Excellent. Any questions from the board? Drew, any public comments?
No public comment on this item, Chair.
Perfect. I'll bring it back. Any additional comments? Motion from Director Rabbit, second from Director Janice Cater Thompson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. We'll move on to item 5.4.
All right. Item 5.4 is Highway 37. And we have Jeanette Weissman here from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission to provide an update, an overview, and to the item is actually an action item because we are seeking direction from the board to send a letter of support to the California Transportation Commission in support of MTC's application for tolling authorization in the 37 corridor. I would remind the board that the last number of years we've had in our legislative platform that Highway 37 tolling is part of what is needed to put together the work in the corridor as a key funding element. And so this is you'll recall last year, there was a bill that we had hoped would provide the authority to do tolling. That was not successful ultimately. And so now we are going through a process through the California Transportation Commission, and they will have a hearing next week to decide whether to provide that authority to the region or not. So Jeanette is here today to give an update and overview on the corridor and why we are supportive of tolling and seek your approval to send the letter. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeanette.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm going to share my screen. All right, hopefully you guys can see this. As Suzanne introduced, I'm here to discuss the State Route 37 Sears Point to Mare Island Improvement Project and the toll facility application that we have submitted to CTC. And as always, representing a broad group of collaborating agencies that you can see on the screen below. So the Bay Area Infrastructure Financing Authority, also known as BAFA, is the agency that is applying to operate the toll facility. So I'm going to start with just that brief overview. I know you guys know State Route 37 well. It's a critical corridor connecting the 4 North Bay communities. It's also a critical evacuation route that we know we need to keep open to your communities in the near and the long term. And so our proposal to do so, as we've presented to you in the past, is to have a phased implementation plan that maintains an operating and effective corridor in the near term while we're working on adapting the corridor to sea level rise in the long term. So I'll describe a little bit further about the Sears Point to Mare Island Improvement Project and tolling itself. The heart of the project is addressing the 10-mile section between Sears Point to Mare Island, where State Route 37 drops to 1 lane in each direction. And as shown here in this image, we aim to do so by introducing high occupancy vehicle lanes. And also will be including express bus transit as part of the project. The project includes public improvement project improvements specifically to recreational access, and will also include safety improvements. ITS, as referred to here on the bullet, is intelligent transportation systems. An example of one of the project improvements that would be included is the changeable message signs that would indicate, traffic collision or delays up ahead in order to reduce secondary collisions. The project also will include ecological and transportation resilience for the near term. And critical to being able to deliver these 6 bullets is the inclusion of tolling, because tolling is needed both to fund the project, but also to deliver it. In the absence of that, we cannot provide these increases to capacity. It's just not supportable by state policy anymore. Instead, we need tolling and the HOV in order to manage traffic demand or transportation demand management, and also to prevent inducing vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And to clarify, our application for tolling is before the CTC for approval. So the little graphic that you see in the center of the screen shows that HOV lane would be toll-free, and that the general purpose lane on the outside would be tolled. So this slide shows the proposed toll gantries. So the images are visual simulations. The toll gantries would be electronic transportation, toll collection systems, excuse me. And the arrows indicate where we're currently proposing or considering the potential toll gantry location. So one is along Mare Island, as indicated here, and the other one is just east of State Route 121, shown to the right. We're going to be looking at operations and the best locations and whether we really need 1 or 2. At this point, the proposal is that it could be either one direction, for example, just collecting tolls going westbound, or it could be bi-directional. If we do end up collecting tolls in both directions, it would be at a 50% rate at each location. And just to clarify, the background information around the corridor travelers is from the Napa Valley Transportation Authority study from 2018-2019, where we evaluated the movement of travelers across State Route 37. The green indicates where travel originates, and then the orange is the destination, or where people are heading to. The darker colors indicate greater concentration of travels or trips, excuse me. And that study indicated that the primary origin and destination trips were coming in the west, were going in the westbound direction, going from Vallejo and Fairfield over to Novato in the west. So here is an overview of our project timeline. The steps in gray are the phases of the project that we have already completed. Most recently, we've wrapped up our CEQA NEPA process, the environmental impact report / environmental assessment, and that was finalized this past February. We're now heading into our final design and permitting stage of the project, looking to complete that in early 2025, and then to move into construction in 2025 with a target to complete the improvements and open them up to the public in 2027. Our project funding plan consists of federal and state funds that we've already acquired and have committed. We are also looking at toll financing to add on and provide a significant contribution to our project plan. And we have, as part of our future funding category, several discretionary grant funds or applications that are already submitted and that we're looking to have reviewed and hopefully approved in the near future. And then we have a couple more grants that we're working on over this next year and some additional state highway funding that we're expecting in the future. So I want to wrap up with a brief explanation as to why this project and tolling is so important to the corridor and the adjacent communities. The project, the Sears Point to Mare Island Improvement Project, is really oriented around delivering transportation equity, and it does it through four main ways: providing that congestion relief or reduction in travel time, and providing improved travel reliability, which is so important to travelers, particularly commuters along the route, providing alternatives to driving through this public bus transit, and then delivering discount programs for low-income households. We're also looking to provide, really relevant and valuable trail enhancements so people can utilize the recreation in their backyards in this area. So now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on each of those items, starting off first and foremost with the importance around congestion relief. This project is really based around delivering time efficiency and travel reliability. We understand that commuters along State Route 37 need to get to their work, back home, to childcare, and to other important responsibilities in a timely manner. This project will reduce those commutes by over 50%. And we recognize that travelers' time is valuable, and it also has a monetary value to them. And we are looking at the opening year of that adding up to 85 million, and then over the course of five years to up to 578 million. So the travel improvements we recognize is critical to users, commuters of State Route 37. And in absence of this project, in absence of tolling, which is critical to delivery of the project, that's just going to get more congested, to take more time, and to be less reliable. It's also important in order for us to be able to manage vehicle miles traveled, congestion, and pollution caused as a result of using the corridor and traveling in this area. So more detail on the transit Solano Transportation Authority is taking the lead on developing transit and rideshare in the area, working currently with the other North Bay transportation authorities and transit providers in order to identify viable routes that will be valuable and meaningful and will get ridership along the corridor. And they're doing so by really integrating mobility hubs, recognizing that people need to connect to other means of transit to get along the way, recognizing that park and ride lots are really critical in order to having a place to hop onto transit, first and last mobility, and integrating discounted programs to get people to their destination and back home, and the importance of supporting carpooling. And we're doing that, the rideshare support through the commute37.com platform where riders can be connected with one another and develop and support carpools. The toll equity discount program is something that we are going to be building up and working on moving forward. We currently look at the I-80 Express Lane Start program as an example and a jumping off point. I-80 Start looks to the 200% of the federal poverty level as the starting point for the low income discounts, and using existing qualifying standards such as Clipper Start to get people quickly and easily into the program. We recognize this can be expanded, or we want to evaluate the need and the opportunity to do so to better address the discount needs and support the users and travelers along State Route 37. We will be looking to stay in communication with the community as we work on developing the most equitable tolling program for travelers along State Route 37. And we'll be doing so, keeping in communication with you all, with the communities, using traditional and social media. And then thirdly, talking about the recreational access I'd mentioned earlier, the Sears Point Trail Connector, something I know that you guys have heard about in the past. It's something that we've received much support of and as a high priority for in advancing recreation improvements. In the near term, along State Route 37, the Sears Point Connector would connect approximately 8 miles of bike and pedestrian trails around State Route 37. So lastly, the project looks to integrate transportation and ecological resiliency as a phased adaptation strategy. So to the left, we have a nature-based solution, the Strip Marsh East, which is a marsh habitat just west of Mare Island and just south of State Route 37 by Cullinan Ranch. And it's an area which currently supports a number of important sensitive species such as the salt marsh harvest mouse. And it's an area that's undergoing rapid degradation because of a drainage problem. And we see this as an opportunity to address a near-term habitat need while also providing resilience to 37 in the near term by building up that high marsh, which will then provide wave energy attenuation to provide additional protection during storm surges and high tides. To the right is Foley Creek, where we have a narrowed section of Tole Creek by State Route 37, which is a restoration roadblock because the restoration projects proposed as part of the Sonoma Creek strategy, Balin strategy, will need to have enhanced tidal prism in order to support their success. So what we're doing as part of this project is proposing the Tole Creek Bridge replacement, which will open up Tole Creek with a longer bridge, and in doing so, bringing the tidal prism that's needed in the near term, really in the next several years, in order to support that restoration project also providing us some near-term adaptation resilience to the transportation facility. So with that, I really want to thank you for your time to hear about this project and this important step towards the near-term enhancements around State Route 37. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. I'm going to bring it back to the board and see if there's any questions. Director Kelly, followed by Director Corsi.
Can you confirm for I was looking at the START program and the I-80 START discount for low-income residents. Are you proposing a 50% toll reduction, or it's uncertain at this point? That's correct. The jumping off point is a 50% discount.
Director Corsi.
You may have mentioned this, but can you tell us what the annual revenue projection is on the tolls?
You know, I didn't mention it, and I have to tell you, we don't have the details of that yet. It's something that we have to do, further financial analysis. However, we've done some very initial analysis, and depending on how we finance things, we have a couple different approaches, but essentially we know we are confident in having that 100 million available, and additionally to be able to support the toll facility and to use additional portion of our revenues to help leverage the long-term resiliency along this section of State Route 37.
Do I understand that you're saying at least 100 million, potentially more?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. At least it's a little higher than the benefits that.
Yeah.
Actually, no, it would be good if the benefits were higher than the tolls.
Yep, I think we do.
Director Bagby.
We'll say if 100 million gets us where we need to be. But thank you, Jeanette. That was a great presentation. I appreciate, and hopefully we can get those slides to us. That would be great. And I especially appreciated the origin and destination heat map that you kind of showed, because it really showed the interdependence between Sonoma and Solano and Marin counties, the job centers and the housing, and how, we've really evolved regionally to be our own job and housing shed. But of course, because of the inequities around housing, we have so many commuters who come in from Solano County. And so I'm especially excited about the bus portion. It's absolutely essential. I'm very happy to hear that it'll be going to San Rafael, and hopefully can hook up with Smart and Golden Gate and other local carriers. But I'm wondering if, and you may not be the right person to ask because you're MTC and not Solano, but they say Solano Transportation Authority really, I'm glad to hear that they're taking the lead. They seem to be really taking a holistic approach to providing transportation for their aging population and their workers. I kind of did a little, I kind of backed into it because I was doing research for hopefully a local transportation program here in Sonoma County, and I found out about GoGo Grandparent. And I think is that the ride sharing and solutions that you were referring to that would benefit from this? Or is it just kind of the whole holistic approach that Solano Transportation Authority is taking? Just to provide that last mile and the transportation options for seniors and for people for whom that maybe a bus or a car is not an option.
Right. I may defer to David or James on this, but I have to tell you, lost me a little bit at GoGo Grandmother, but it sounds like a great idea. I would say, just to clarify that what I do know is that the ride sharing is supporting the carpool connection, and that exists right now and is going to continue this Commute 37 to connect potential carpoolers. The first last mile component bullet that was on the slide is referring to the Uber discount program that may be a go-go grandma scenario as well, but that is
It's on the
really.
solanomobility.org site. Yeah, that's probably way down in the weeds. Sorry about that. But it's just interesting that, yeah, their transportation authority is just really, it's not, well, should we do this or do that? It's okay, let's provide solutions for everybody. And so I think that they're really the right group to kind of take the lead on this. I was really disappointed that the legislation wasn't successful, but I think that this approach has a lot of potential just because and Solano County, interestingly, is very similar to Sonoma County in that it has that combination of urban and then like really isolated areas like Rio Vista. And so they're very similar to us, and they need a combination of solutions to really meet their geographic needs, their demographic needs. This was kind of a very helpful presentation to kind of put the dots together. But I guess as far as, for someone who has to drive 37 to go to Sacramento on a regular basis, it's like, well, can we just put a coffee can out and start collecting now? Because, I've born and raised here, and I've been doing, that trip to Sacramento all of my life. And this past winter, it just became very clear that we can't wait any longer. So I'm actually I'm excited to finally get moving on this. And thanks for your presentation and your hard work on it.
Director Cater Thompson.
Just clarification, are there protected bike lanes on this area?
There aren't protected bike lanes. Do you mean existing and proposed or either? Both. Okay. I think there's no protected bike lanes. There's a small section. I think it's by Noble Road where there's like just access and egress where they put in a little bit of a lane, but there's no protected bike lanes right now. In fact, overall, there's some really challenging conditions for biking on State Route 37, but the way that we're really looking for moving forward is for that full safe bike pedestrian route as part of the long-term resilience projects, when we can provide that separation and to make it a much more appealing ride and route for bicyclists and pedestrians.
Just for clarification, so there is space available for bike lanes, even if it's not protected?
No, there isn't space in the near-term project. Oh, I don't know if someone else in the room is going to.
So sorry, Jenna, just to clarify, right now, there's a bike lane on Highway 37. The condition of that bike accessibility will not change significantly with this project, but it will remain similar to what is out there. The difference is when we get to the longer term, the ultimate project, the long-term resiliency project, that will have capacity and width for a separate bike lane.
And maybe the point of confusion has to do about the recreation enhancements. Is that the question?
Just looking into the future and wanting to make sure that it's available for, when I'm gone.
Director Rabbit.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Jeanette, for the presentation. And kudos to SCTA for really tackling this issue starting 10 years ago or whatever it's been. At a time when Caltrans was not willing to give anyone an opportunity or a timeline of addressing this. And talk about an equity issue. The people who live in Vallejo who are working all points west, basically waste 100 minutes of their day, if not more, sitting in traffic. So it'd be nice to really truly address that as well. The origin and destination chart, while it's great, it also shows that it'll be a challenge to get a bus service that really, because it's dispersed on both sides. So it's not from one place to another, but from several. But that's a challenge worth pursuing. And I'm a member of BAFA, the Bay Area Infrastructure Finance Authority. That's the tolling mechanism for express lanes also a member of BATA, which is the Bay Area Toll Authority, and that's the bridge tolling mechanism. But tolling really allows leveraging of dollars and that steady revenue stream to pay off debt service, obviously. So they do get leverage quite well. And I think what's interesting here is going the CTA route. Although I think we would have been successful on the legislation, it was really a matter of timing. Going the CTA route, the approach to tolling results in no toll whatsoever for the HOV lanes, as opposed to legislation which would allow for a discount but still charge a toll. So I think it's about the only really truly significant piece, and that's not necessarily a bad one. But it does go to the Jeanette's hesitation on the dollars coming in, because the mix of the traffic is going to make a difference as well. So look forward to moving this forward, totally supportive of taking that next step to progress this project. The interim project, as was noted, is well north of 400 million, probably pushing closer to $500 million. And then the ultimate project is multiples of billions. So something that we need to kind of continue forward for the next generation.
Director Kelly.
Thank you, Director Abbott. And I think speaking to the interim piece versus the long-term piece might have answered my colleague's question about the bike lanes. Can you speak, Jeanette, about the time frame? So should this move forward and tolling is approved, the interim project, how long will we be living in an interim phase? And then the ultimate long-term project, and the long-term project has not yet confirmed about bike lanes, but that is something that is being proposed and evaluated. Is that correct?
Right, that's correct. So to clarify, or put the start point on when we, or reminder at least, for the Sears Point to Mare Island Improvement Project, looking to have that open for use in 2027 at some point during that year. And then the long-term resilience projects are really going to be a series of projects. The Planning and Environmental Linkages Study identified 8 discrete projects that will fill up or make up that full corridor resilience. We're already working on the flood reduction project between 101 and Atherton, and that's in the beginning stages of the CEQA NEPA analysis. The complete implementation of the long-term resilience for State Route 37 likely will be 20 years. So I think to answer your question more specifically, that may be 15 or so years of an interim phase, but we hope it'll be really valuable to the commuters and users of State Route 37. And was there another part of the question that I didn't answer? Sure.
No, I think it's confirmed that bike lanes or other modes of transportation will be included in the final plan.
Thank you for repeating that. Absolutely. So having full bike pedestrian facility that is both safe, separated, and enjoyable, and supports the long-term Bay Trail connection along the corridor is part of the long-term vision for State Route 37. So that's correct. And as a multimodal corridor that will support transit as well.
Director Bagby.
Sorry, back on the point of the bike capacity right now, and this may be way too far down in the weeds, but it sounds like there is some appetite for at least the very least a bike bridge. So are the buses that are planning to be used, are those going to be bike friendly? And would there be some crossover in that you'd be able to take your bike to some of the trail areas and things like that, and then once and then continue on the bus? Is that part of the plan right now, Jeanette?
Right, that's exactly right. We were coordinating, I apologize for my dog in the background, but we were coordinating with the bike pedestrian organizations in the North Bay. We heard very clearly that while they recognize the limitations in terms of space and costs in the interim for bike and pedestrian facilities, they really want to make sure we're moving towards that in the long term. And in the meantime, making important improvements, recognizing that bus is an important way of getting across the corridor. In the meantime, we heard loud and clear. In fact, we received a combined letter from the North Bay Bike Pedestrian organizations that specified that exact point, that they wanted to support transit in the near term in this interim period as part of the project. And would like also the Sears Point to Mare Island recreation improvements as a off corridor recreational enhancement for bicyclists and pedestrians.
And my questions are following up on Director Kelly's and Bagby's questions is really, do we have a sense of what the ultimate funding mechanism will be for that 15 to 20-year solution? Because I think that we've all experienced quote unquote interim solutions that wind up being permanent and funding sources that don't actually materialize that you hope are going to materialize. So I guess what is the foundation that's being laid presently to ensure that we actually do get to that ultimate resilient solution that does include the multimodal sort of transportation that I think everyone on this board supports?
Yeah, so right now, we've actually recently received this past year the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator Grant to support our Resilient State Route 37 program in order to support innovative financing and project delivery. And this is going to be an important kind of stepping off point to help us to continue or really get into the more of the weeds of our financing and identify strategies for delivering the long-term resilience projects as quickly and as effectively as possible. So we need to get into the details of that, but we are working on it, and we've received this grant, which is both a monetary award, but also a way to connect with, in this case, the Build America Board and USDOT, FHWA more intimately. So now we're working and collaborating with them on a regular basis. I have a bi-weekly meeting where I'm talking with my Build America collaborator on ways that we can make this program move more efficiently and more robustly. So we're really excited about doing that. We're also, as part of our partnership agreement at the state level, working with the state on all levels, and then working to expand that collaboration, work with restoration agencies to really find synergy, particularly in that long-term realm, where we can bring restoration of the North Bay Bayland, as well as a resilient State Route 37 as quickly as possible.
All right, thank you. Let's go to public comment on the item.
Yes, we have Steve Bertle-Bow. Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. I'm interested in whether the calculation of reduction of bottleneck backups applies just to the interim project, or whether it measures the backups for people that are trying to get down to San Rafael that meet the backup where the 101 intersection is located. And then I'm also interested in whether we have any assurance that an interim project could last for 15 years at sea level, at the current elevation, or whether that would be cut short by sea level rise. And then I'm interested in whether there will be a toll for people who are using the Novato Creek Bridge as well as for this one, and whether this request for tolling authority applies to the Novato Creek Bridge segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, next in line, we have Tom Conlon. Tom, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the information and the presentation as well. My questions go to some of those that were raised by members of the board. I know Congressman Huffman had made a number of statements about, what Linda Hopkins said about the interim project becoming the sort of permanent project. And I just did some math. If it is a $500 million and it'll last about 15 years, that's about what, 300, I mean, that's about $33 million a year to kind of just the capital costs here. Seems like an awful lot for a disposable roadway that we know is going to be underwater pretty soon. I'm also curious about the promise that this will in fact reduce congestion. We know that induced demand, when you do build a highway, more people will tend to use it, particularly if the high occupancy vehicles or lanes are free. And the idea that there's going to be potentially 75,000 new housing units built out at Mare Island. You know, I'm wondering if that 15 years promise of reduced congestion is really going to materialize. And then I too have questions about the tolling. It sounds like those of us who live in Sonoma Valley or in Marin County and who commute between those two places will be able to, you know, drive over the improvements that have been made over the past year or two and won't have to pay any tolls. That doesn't strike me as being equitable when, you know, just because we don't have to go to Mare Island and Vallejo. But those are my thoughts on this. I'm curious if some of those topics could be addressed. Appreciate your concentration on those. Thank you.
I don't see any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to bring it back to the board. I'm just going to remind you, this is a support letter for a public hearing that's next week. Given that we have our budget, I'm going to ask if we need to get into the specifics between the interim versus the long term, which has nothing to do with this letter. We can do that after budget, but I'll look first to see if there's a motion on the letter as it's been presented.
I'll move.
Okay, a second. Is there any additional discussion?
Just real quickly, because I think it's really important to counter the idea of throwaway money or disposable roadway, because that's really anything but the truth. The truth of the matter is today you have basically a substandard road that's on wetlands that sinks each and every year. Sea level rise is coming up, the road is going down, it's a bad combination. And there's millions of dollars being spent now to keep that road open in its current substandard condition with inadequate shoulders and in 100-minute waits. The congestion really will come to those who are sitting there now. That is an equity issue. And it is ironic that our Marin County friends continue to overlook that. But I think that if you really want to talk about equity, time is important for all, not just those who have money. And I think that again, the dollars being invested in the interim project actually go to help solve the long-term project and stay in the ground to help move that forward. The extension on Tole Creek Bridge can do that as well. That's being extended in length, 2 feet in width, very minor, but in length to allow environmental remediation. The strip marsh on further over by Solano is being restored once again. It failed when it was first being built. That's a true positive environmental remediation for the project. There's no throwaway money. It's really a project. And, you know, quite frankly, if our congressman would love to, I would love to say, just please give us the full price now. And we've said that a number of times in different meetings. We won't do the interim if we have the money to do the ultimate project. But we all know that $10 billion projects don't come around for 45,000 vehicle roadway. So there's an order moving forward. And I would also say that what will force us to actually continue to put the ultimate project in place is the ever rising bay water. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director. Director Reynosa?
So I definitely understand that this is an important project for the future. I have such a hard time charging our low-income families that are working that got pushed out of Sonoma County. I know I've seen it happen with address changes for people working in Sonoma County having to go to live in Solano County. And so and even with the discount, there's so many people living paycheck to paycheck that any type of toll is going to impact them. So I hesitantly will support this, but I need us to realize that what drove them out of Sonoma County. So they have this longer commute. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Great, thank you. With that, all in favor? Any opposed? Great, we'll send the letter, and it sounds like it'd be appropriate for us to agendize again in the future a more in-depth conversation about the short-term versus long-term. Again, that's not the issue we're dispensing with today, but it sounds like there's still a lot of interest from the public and from the board. Let's go on to item 5.6. For folks who are new to the board or those who've been here so long that you've forgotten, we have 4 budgets that typically get presented one after the other. And then it gives us an opportunity at the end of that to talk about them in totality and take them as an item at the end of the presentation. So we'll kick it off with Tanya.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and directors. And let's see, is the presentation? All right, so I am going to start with the RCPA budget. And as the chair mentioned, we will go through all 4 and then turn it back. Can you hear me now? All right, maybe I need to lean closer. Turn it back to the board for discussion and adoption. And so the 4 budgets are the RCPA, the Transportation Fund for Clean Air, or TFCA program, Measure M, and the SCTA General Operations. Now, staff will be bringing back a final budget to the board at a public hearing in October of this year for your review and adoption. So starting with the RCPA budget, a couple of points. I can start with the revenue side. Oh, there it goes. All right. It's maybe a big file. All right, if you go back a couple more. So I'll start on the revenue side. So we are showing a 3.5% increase in revenue from fiscal year 22-23 to the new fiscal year 23-24. And the main components of that increase in revenue, we do have an increase of about $110,000 in Bay Run funding, and this funding will be used to support the addition of a new program specialist position. And this is because we are expanding the water upgrade save program. We're in discussions now with East Bay Mud, which is a very large utility in the East Bay, to sign on to the program, and are also looking at a number of other utilities. So this funding will help us expand that program, as well as do additional outreach and engagement around the other Bay Run energy efficiency programs. And I'm sorry that the slide is not coming up, but I'll just continue. We also have an addition of $50,000, as Suzanne mentioned, from the County of Sonoma's Climate Resilience Fund to support the climate polling that we discussed earlier. And then there are a couple of reductions in revenue from last year to this year, or this new fiscal year. We completed an agreement with Sonoma Clean Power, and so we won't see that funding renew in the next fiscal year. And then we also, in our last current budget, we had budgeted for additional funding from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and we are not including that in our next year's fiscal proposed budget. And then lastly, I wanted to mention in terms of our overall budget, it was mentioned earlier that Bay Run is a significant portion of our budget. So the revenue breakdown for our sources of funding, about 21% of our funding, which is what comes from our local member and partner contributions, supports our core RCPA programs. And in this new year, I mean, right now and continuing into the new fiscal year, our emphasis is really going to be on the Climate Protection Initiative and moving that measure forward. And about 4% of our budget is for water upgrade save capital, which is what finances or funds the energy efficiency projects that take place with each water utility. And then 75% of the funding is from Bay Run and supports those programs. We've also factored in a small 4.88% increase in our local member and partner contributions that's based on the CPI. So that's the revenue. And then on the expenditure side, to complement the revenue, we have the increased expenses planned for the new position that we're planning for. And then we have some increases in consultant expenses, and those are really primarily focused on the Climate Protection Initiative and supporting that climate measure polling and increased community engagement. So that was the revenue and expenditures. And so the last slide for RCPA is our staff recommendation that the board adopt our FY 23-24 preliminary budget. And I should note that in 23-24, we are, our proposal includes a use of our fund balance, which is that 95,000 that you see there at the bottom, which is basically what's going to support the budget that we have before you today. So that's what I wanted to present for the RCPA budget. And now I'd like to introduce David to cover the TFCA and Measure M budgets.
Thank you, Tanya, and good afternoon again, Mr. Chair and directors. So this is the TFCA budget for the upcoming fiscal year. As you approved in the earlier item, this includes the new projects for fiscal year 23-24 and also any carryover projects for the upcoming fiscal year. I should note that for the TFCA program, 6.25% of the funding is used for our staff time and resources to administer the program, and that's reflected in the budget. So on the next slide, we talk about the changes in the upcoming fiscal year. There's a roughly 5.3 increase in the revenue estimates from the DMV. That the TFCA fund is a surcharge on vehicle registration. So more people are registering their cars, and the rollovers are coming down because projects have been completed in prior fiscal years. On next budget, next slide, we go over the reductions. And so it's mostly reductions to the city projects. There's a small increase in the number of projects for Sonoma County Transit. And there's a small increase in the amount going to admin because of the higher revenue estimate. And on the final slide, we are recommending that you adopt the fiscal year 23-24 TFCA preliminary budget. And I'll go right into the Measure M budget now. So Measure M was passed by the voters in 2004 and will expire in 2025 and has been expended by the Go Sonoma Act until 2045. And we administer Measure M consistent with the expenditure plan and board approved strategic plan. And I should note that revenues have recovered very highly, and we're at 97% of the original estimate we had in 2004. On the next slide, we can see the performance in the fourth quarter of 2022. I should note that while the actual growth rate was 3.6% in that quarter compared to the fourth quarter of 2021, the adjusted growth rate was only 0.8%. So revenue has been very static, and a lot of that revenue growth has been driven by inflation over the last couple of years. There's decreased consumer spending as people have been spending less because of the uncertain environment we're in right now economically, and fuel prices have also remained pretty high. On the next slide, we go over the actuals for the last few fiscal years. And as you can see, we're outperforming our original projection for last year's budget by about $300,000 estimated by the end of June. And so the revenue estimate for this fiscal year is about 1.6%. For the upcoming fiscal year, we anticipate revenues to be relatively flat and have an actual slight decrease at 0.7% before returning in fiscal year 25 to historical growth rates of about 2.6%. So we're in the point right now we're having a little bit of a decrease in the revenue. Measure M is composed of 6 primary programs, and there's a total of 10 budgets as outlined in your staff report for each of the funding programs, and also the debt service for the Highway 101 program. And on the next slide, we talk about the increase in the budget. And as I mentioned earlier, it is relatively flat from the current fiscal year. And on our next slide, we have an increase in money going out as we have large capital projects for the Hearn Avenue interchange and the continued construction on Fulton Road in Santa Rosa. There are in construction. And so we have a great increase in contributions to other governments for those costs. Next slide. And with that, we recommend that you adopt the fiscal year 23-24 Measure M preliminary budget. Now I'll turn over to James Cameron to talk about the SCTA budget.
The fourth and final budget is the SCTA budget. So the SCTA was created by ordinance back in 1990, was originally administered at the county, and in 1997, they hired their first staff, Suzanne Smith, and since then it has been these separate budgets that we're looking at now. We currently have 16 full-time staff positions being proposed as part of the fiscal year 24 budget, and the high-level overview is that we are in manageable financial shape. Looking at the next slide, which is our organizational chart, it shows you that all staff are part of SCTA's budget. So there is reimbursements from those prior 3 budgets, the RCPA, as well as program and administration and implementation of the Water Upgrade Save, Measure M, and TFCA. There's currently one vacant position that will be advertised later this week to fill to help the BayREN program Water Upgrade Save be implemented. You can see the TBD on the slide above. Moving on, we'll take a look at the revenue within the SCTA budget. The revenue does include a 4.8% increase in our local contributions based on CPI. The first revenue line is the revenue that we get from outside services. The second revenue line is from internal. So those prior three budgets, both the RCPA, BayREN Water Upgrade Save Program, Measure M, and TFCA are shown as reimbursements, which give you an understanding or the sum totals there of the total revenue available within the SCTA budget. High-level changes in our fiscal year 24 budget include $2 million increase in our State Route 37 state allocations, as well as decreases in two of our locally funded programs, which are the Sonoma Narrows project being funded partially by Great Mitigation fees, as well as State Route 121 8th Street East being funded by a contribution from Sonoma County Public Infrastructure. Other notable changes include a $300,000 decrease within our bike share program, which is planned to be implemented over the next 2 fiscal years, as well as a $145,000 increase from BayREN to cover that new position as a program specialist. Moving on to expenditures, you'll see there's an overall decrease in expenditures of 8.9%. These expenditures include anticipated merit increases for eligible staff, as well as a 2.5% cost of living increase that was approved by the SCTA board 1 year ago today with the budgets. And other notable increases in expenditures include a $2 million increase in consultant services for State Route 37 as we move forward with the implementation of ecological restoration and mitigation projects associated with the near-term project that we just discussed, as well as the long-term project. And then a major reduction of $3.3 million in contributions to other governments. This is essentially as we wrap up the Sonoma Narrows or MSNC2 project, those contributions from SCTA that are associated with the Great Mitigation Fund are going to continue to decrease. The last summary slide gives you an overall view. As you'll see, it's a well-balanced budget this year where we have an increase in fund balance of $170K by the end of the fiscal years being projected. And with that, I would ask the board to adopt the preliminary budget and approve the local contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's start with questions from the board. Let's go to public comment.
No public comment on this item, Chair Rogers.
Great. I'll bring it back. Director Kelly, did you have something you were going to ask / state?
Yes. Thank you. So I know that the local contributions from the cities and the county are increasing. Wondering how the conversation, I think that was presented to the TAC. And since our city staff, most of our staff are representative on that body, how that was received. I know our revenue isn't going up, so it's hard to be comfortable committing to an increased expense for cities when the funding source is uncertain. So I'm just curious how that conversation went, if there was pushback or any further clarification.
So Mr. Zimmer is our chair of the Technical Advisory Committee. When we brought this to them for review, it's brought to them as an informational item as opposed to an action item. There was some discussion over how we have handled local contributions in the past and the need for the increase in local contributions for SCTA to address expenditures that aren't eligible for any of the other reimbursement, essentially expenditures that are ineligible for those reimbursement programs where we get the majority of the budget from. With that being said, there was discussion also about the desire for the small increases. If you look back at the history of this, we had many years without increases that then resulted in a fairly large increase. But there was no objections. There was just the discussion that I described, and then it was accepted as an informational item without action.
All right, so we have 2 resolutions and 4 budgets, I believe. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Director Rabbit, second from the Vice Chair. Any additional comments? Just want to make a quick comment of gratitude to everybody, all of the employees here at SCTA that fall under all of the different categories. We look at the budget, we know that for the amount of work that we get out of this organization, the budget doesn't even reflect that because you are so skilled at what you do and at building partnerships throughout the region. So just want to say thank you for that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, let's go ahead and jump back then to item 5.5, and thank you, directors, for being here for the budget.
All right, so I am covering our Bike Month actions item. So obviously May is Bike Month, and we thought this would be a good opportunity to bring to the board an update on some of the actions that we have taken to walk our talk and really commit to the sustainability practices that we feel are important, and also to request that you consider adoption of 2 additions to our personnel policies which support these actions, and also authorizing renewal of a small subscription fee to a membership in an online tool called Love to Ride. So a little bit of background, wherever possible, the RCPA and SCTA really strives to implement the practices that we know will support both employees and visitors in choosing more sustainable commute options like biking, walking, and transit. And we want to encourage folks to take advantage of that. And so one of the actions that we took in the last year is we successfully applied for and were awarded a bike-friendly business award through the League of American Bicyclists at the bronze level, which is kind of the starting point. And we aspire to go to silver and gold in the future. And we are one of only 2 organizations in Sonoma County to receive that award to date. We also are a sponsor of the Sonoma County Bike to Work Month and Bike to Work Day, and are encouraging staff to ride to work next Thursday on Bike to Work Day. And we have sponsored this event in the past as well. And so the proposed actions that we're requesting board adoption, first is the renewal of the organizational membership in the Love to Ride program. And this is an online platform that enables or encourages employees to log their commute trips by bike and transportation trips by bike. It has competitions and other tools that help folks choose more sustainable options. And that's about $290 to renew. So it's a small subscription fee. And then the bigger piece of this is the request to approve adding 2 new policies to our personnel policies. And the first is a parking cash out policy. So state law does require employers of a certain size to offer this who provide subsidized parking for their employees to offer a cash allowance in lieu of a parking space. Now, SCTA and RCPA does not we're not required to follow this because we're too small, but we would like to offer this as a benefit to our employees. We have limited parking. I believe we have 11 spaces, and we're now at 16? We'll be 16 employees, so we don't have a 1-for-1 parking space. So what this program or policy would allow us to do is offer staff an option to cash out the parking, and we're proposing to start this in the first pay period of July 2023. It would be a $70 a month cash out or taxable income in lieu of an assigned parking space. So employees would basically be agreeing to not drive to work and park in a space, but to use alternative modes of transportation. So that's the parking cash out policy. And then the second is our environmental policy statement. We are going through the process of becoming a certified green business. And one of the requirements in that process is to adopt an environmental policy. And before I go any further, I want to give a shout out to Drew. He's really been leading our efforts to gain this green business certification, and it's been a tremendous help. So I want to thank Drew for all of his help on this. So we've included the environmental policy in your packet, and the proposed policy statement includes kind of 4 overall policies and practices to reduce, reuse, and recycle, avoid the use of toxic chemicals, conserve energy, water, natural resources, and move away from fossil fuels where possible, and promote environmental education, outreach, and awareness to our staff. And I should note that we're already doing most of the items in our checklist, but there are a few that we are working to complete to become fully certified. So just in summary, our request is that the board consider adoption of these two additions to our personnel policies and consider authorizing renewal of our membership in this Love to Ride platform. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Tanya. Are there any questions from the board? Director Bagby?
Do you want the board to join the online bike club for
Sure,
SCTA?
yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Melody is going to rack them
The more
up
the
coming from
merrier.
Cloverdale.
Rack 'em up.
Great. Let's see if there's any public comment.
Yep. Oh, I see Tom Conlon with his hand up. Tom, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I just want to say I wholeheartedly support the parking cash out program. I appreciate all the efforts employees at the agency are doing. And yeah, I love the idea that Love to Ride might be participated in as well by board members, as well as all the community advisory committees that participate in RCPA and SCTA activities. So let's challenge one another to get out there and bicycle more. One last question goes back to the previous item under budgets. I noticed that the bike share budget is phasing down, and I had not realized that previous to that discussion. So I'm just curious, I think the whole bike share program fell apart, isn't that right? I've just lost the thread on that one. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tom. I don't see any other members of the public with their hands up, Chair Rogers.
Great. I'll go ahead and bring it back. Executive Director, do you want to respond on the last question?
On the bike share issue. The bike share issue is still live. We are reissuing the request for proposals, hopefully in the next month, maybe even sooner. And so I believe the budget is a reflection of it, the grant going over 2 years. So we had anticipated it in this current budget cycle. That has not come to be. So hopefully we will get it up and going in the next budget cycle.
Great, thank you. So I'll go ahead and bring this item back and see if there's a motion for approval. Moved by Director Giudice, seconded by Director Kater Thompson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. Let's go to item 5.7.
Where am I? Sorry. 5.7, that is me. The legislative update on advocacy. There were a couple of things I wanted to mention. One is related to, I know the board has expressed interest in bills related to the Brown Act. There are 4 that we've been tracking in particular. The 2 on the Assembly side do not seem to be advancing, and the 2 on the Senate side have been amended significantly. One to only cover Los Angeles, and the other to not include, well, again, to almost only cover Los Angeles or the SCAG region. So it's not been as productive, I guess, as one might have hoped. So that is one part of it. The other part I wanted to mention is there continues to be a significant degree of advocacy around transit funding and addressing the transit fiscal cliff, and asking the legislature to help address the transit funding shortfalls throughout the state. The Bay Area is particularly hit by transit shortfalls, especially the larger operators, the commute-based systems. But we continue to partner and sign on to those letters urging state support for transit. So we will be interested to see what comes out in the May revise, and I will leave it at that.
Great, thank you so much. Director Rabbit.
Since you mentioned the transit fiscal cliff, of which I'm on the subcommittee, I think it actually has a new name, like transit sustainability or something less ominous.
Thrive and survive.
Yeah.
Survive and thrive.
I think we were originally looking at 8 different revenue sources. A couple of them were new, but most of them were actually taking money from other sources, some of them which were, for this body, would be painful, including SHOP, funds after a certain percentage increase, sweeping the rest into the, which remained, I think, one of the 4 that was recommended going forward. So there's a lot of, and the other part of that, the $5 billion really started out at $6.5 billion. Somehow it got to 5. I'm not sure what that $1.5 billion gap is going to do. They actually added another billion because on top of that, the state wants to make sure that transit, which quite honestly was declining prior to COVID, would actually come up with some new approach and be a little more imaginative about serving customers. So MTC's, I think it was survive and thrive was kind of the mantra. But obviously it takes a lot of dollars coming out of Sacramento. The federal government has given us all these dollars to date, which we still at the Golden Gate Bridge are filtering through. But now it's the state's turn. And that's looking at a 5-year window to somehow get through this period of time to a little more stability going forward. So it's really dire times in terms of financing transit for those who are toll and fare dependent, which in the Bay Area includes BART, that includes Caltrain, and the Golden Gate Bridge. And in the South Bay or the Southland, it's some others, and there's still a few others that show deficits as well. So it's been a challenge, but that'll be ongoing, and that will affect, unfortunately, I believe, other funding sources to be able to push the money around to take care of operations.
Seeing no other questions, let's go to public comment.
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Okay, I'll bring it back. Sounds like you have all of the direction that you need so far based on previous conversations.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Are there any last comments from the board? Okay, we're going to go on then. Item 6.1, you have the advisory committee agenda is in the packet. We'll come back to item 6.2. Let's go on to item 6.3, our regional agency reports. Does anybody have anything to share? Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Bay Area Air Quality Management District, mobile and stationary source are both meeting on Wednesday, and the stationary committee source meets at 10 a.m. and there is a virtual option, and we'll be discussing prescribed burning, which is something that is of keen interest in Sonoma County and kind of the costs and permitting processes affiliated with the air district. So I did want to mention that, especially, I believe there was some feedback actually from the Sonoma Valley. So Director Farrar Rivas, if you want to reach out to any of your fire contacts or anyone else who is within the confines of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, I'm hoping that we'll have an opportunity to discuss ways in which we can streamline and improve prescribed burning permitting processes going forward. Because what I've heard preliminarily is that the uncertainty introduced by the air district is really challenging, right? You got 40 firefighters lined up, ready to go, and you're waiting to find out whether your smoke management plan is approved. It can create some challenges. So I want to mention that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Director Corsi?
Just want to note that SMART has added some trains on Friday and Saturday nights that leave south and north after 9 o'clock. They call it, we are calling it the date night train. It's for Starlighter. Yeah, but it's
date night
there's
sounds
also
good.
there's also this date thing going on. And I'm thinking that must be for people my age who want to get home by 10. So, but they are later trains, and encourage people to try them out.
Yes, one of our staff affectionately called it the drunk train, but I don't think it's quite that way.
Drunk train. Wow.
Director Giudice?
Sure. I mean, Director Rabbit commented on GGB. In other news, we named a ferry, Olompali, in honoring local indigenous folks. Speaking of gantries, we are took another step in building one and removing the old toll booths. So that's happening as well. And David kind of spoke to the challenges of the district, and they are real. They are real. So
excellent.
So if,
Director Bagby?
Yes, and May is not over yet, as we know, and it is a bike month. And if any of the board members or anyone in the public wants to join us, it is love2ride.net. And you can indicate SCTA is your employer, and we would love to get in on the action.
Excellent, thank you. Let's go on to item 6.4, our activities reports.
Good afternoon, directors. I'll give a brief overview of the communications and outreach activity during the previous month. April brought quite a few opportunities to connect directly with the public at some outside tabling events. Many were based around Earth Day and were ideal for promoting RCPA's climate and environmental justice work, but also applicable SCTA programs such as Sonoma Commute Rewards and the Emergency Ride Home. Handout cards and signage with QR codes that direct the public towards those programs were used, with an emphasis on digital assets to avoid extra paper use. Events included Earth Day programs in Santa Rosa and Healdsburg, the Los Cien Environmental Justice Seminar, as well as the Environmental Resource Fair at the Latino Family Education Summit down at SSU. The Climate Protection Initiative Public Workshop, I think that was pretty well covered in the previous item. So I won't go into detail aside to say, if you're curious, we have all the information in various, both English and Spanish in the presentation, and all the past agendas on the Climate Protection Initiative page on the RCPA website. And lastly, just wanted to make you aware of the SCTA coordinated claim press release. Press release was distributed right after the last board meeting, after the board approved the coordinated claim for transit operators. The release emphasized the importance of the nearly 50 million in funds that'll provide the bulk of the revenue that keeps buses and rail in service and running smoothly. So the release featured quotes from the chair and a regular paratransit user that's a member of several advisory committees for SCTA. We got some solid press back from that, and several local articles came out focusing on the coordinated claim. That press release is linked in the May agenda packet. And that concludes my report. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Excellent. Any questions? Great. Let's move on to climate change. Welcome up, BC.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Rogers and members of the board. My name is BC Caps, Climate Change Program Specialist. Just a couple of updates on our other work with on RCPA that we've been working on. In addition to the public workshop on the 19th that we held for the Climate Protection Initiative, we've also been continuing to work with our 3 program committees, and wanted to express my gratitude to the members of the public that have been participating in that effort, and our committee chairs. So we held the most recent, those 3 committee meetings. In addition, on the 14th of last month, we hosted our climate action advisory committee meeting, also made up of representatives of community members. So that was on the 14th. We presented to the Planning Advisory Committee on the 20th regarding our climate protection initiative. And I also participated in several conference calls that were related to the US 9th Circuit Court decision regarding the City of Berkeley's natural gas ban. So that is a legal case that may have some legal implications for jurisdictions in Sonoma County. So we've been watching that very closely. In addition, we are continuing to work very closely with the county's Climate Action and Resiliency Division on our implementation of the Bay Area Regional Energy Network programs. The county's climate division has been hosting quarterly hosting additional workshop series and contractor outreach events to promote those programs. Also been offering reach support to local jurisdictions for any jurisdictions that are working on their all-electric building codes. In addition, I wanted to give a brief update on the Water Upgrades SAVE program, currently operating in Sebastopol and Cloverdale. In Cloverdale, there have been 8 projects completed so far, and in Sebastopol, there have been 51 projects completed so far in by the program. And as was mentioned earlier, we are continuing to talk with the East Bay Municipal Utility District as a possibility for further expansion of that program. So thank you very much.
Thank you, BC. Any questions? Great. Let's move on to planning.
Great. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and directors. Chris Barney, Director of Planning with SCTA. So happy to give a brief report on some of the things the planning team's been working on that weren't discussed on the agenda today. So starting off with safety programs and Vision Zero, the Vision Zero Advisory Committee met on May 2nd to discuss implementations of the Vision Zero Action Plan, safe routes to school task forces, Vision Zero policies in the Santa Rosa General Plan, and also funding programs for safety projects. Adam was also able to update the Vision Zero data dashboard to include 2022 crash data. So encourage you to take a look at that. It's a great tool available on our website. And we've also opened a call for projects, for safety related projects, for potential countywide joint grant application to the federal state Safe Streets and Roads for All funding program. So that wraps up on May 24th, and we'll be bringing an item to you next month to talk about that funding opportunity. Moving on to Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus and other regional planning activities. I just wanted to mention there's a window to nominate priority development areas right now through July 31st. It's also a chance to change existing boundaries of PDAs as well. So if any of your staff need help with that, please help them reach out to us, and we can help if they need some assistance there. MTC and ABAG are also kicking off the next regional transportation plan update. And so we've been meeting with them about the timeline and helping gather updated project information. And just wanted to give you a heads up that there'll be a window to recommend new projects sometime later this summer. Moving on to housing, we've been following housing element certification and working with local staff to incorporate HCD annual progress report data into SCTA housing development and travel model forecasts. We also attended the 2023 Sonoma County Housing Solutions Summit last week, which was a great event. Learned a lot there. Moving on to transit integration, consulting staff from Nelson Nygaard were in Sonoma County last week to conduct some public outreach. So maybe you ran across them throughout the county. And they promoted a survey developed for the integrated transit service plan. So there's a link to this survey in the staff report in the agenda packet. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. Moving on to safe routes to school, Director Bagby, as you said, it's Bike to Work Month. The Bike Coalition has really been very active promoting that. There was a countywide Bike to School Day on May 3rd. And nearly 50 schools and thousands of students participated in that event this year. So also looking forward to Bike to Work Day later next week. Moving on to commute reward programs. During April, staff promoted the Sonoma County Commute Rewards and Emergency Ride Home programs at a number of different Earth Day events. And if you're interested in learning more about those programs, you can check them out at gosonoma.org.
Director Bagby.
Thanks so much. And sorry to steal your thunder about May being Bike Month. I'm just really excited about it. But on page 124, just kind of back to the transit integration. So you're right, Nelson Nygaard were at my farmer's market on Tuesday, and they had a great booth and they were giving out information, but it might have been helpful to get a little bit of a heads up, because I kind of pointed out, I was like, oh, well, because I talked with them, it was like right after 5 o'clock, and oh, right across the street is a nonprofit. Then right across the street is another nonprofit. Right next door is City Hall. And so I took it upon myself to, get the material and then make sure that it got distributed. But if you wanted to maybe reach out to some of the board members, we might be able to help those folks get the information about the survey out to some of our nonprofit partners in our community. But I've already logged in and done my survey, and hopefully everybody else will grab this URL and do the same, and then spread that out to your networks. I think it's a really important survey, and they were doing a great job at our farmers market. So thanks for your work on that.
Great. Yeah, go ahead.
Question about sort of the PDA identification. And, this is something that's coming up a lot with respect to the housing element and the RENA allocation that we received. And so I'm just wondering if there's any sort of interplay between those two processes as they are moving forward and as we're moving forward, with a housing element that complies.
I don't think there's a very strong connection at this point. So, having a PDA certainly opens up different planning funds, stationary funds, and planning, PDA planning funds. So, but yeah, I can investigate that further and reach out.
I appreciate that because I mean, we're looking at potentially putting thousands of new units into unincorporated Sonoma County, and yet there are no planning funds available for them. I actually don't want to develop in these areas, but if the state is going to force us to put 3,000 to 4,000 units in unincorporated Sonoma County every, 6 years? We should have this conversation. And I don't, did you say that July was the deadline?
July 31st.
Okay, that's not very much time, but I think it would be really great maybe just to check in with the different jurisdictions and sort of look at the, RENA numbers as a way to potentially look at, do we need to expand or, what does it look like?
I would say on the PDAs that MDC and ABAG, as they are developing the forecasts and the RENA, associated RENA allocations, they certainly do look at the PDA areas as areas to concentrate housing and other growth.
I would beg to differ on that last point, representing really no PDAs and they're all putting housing in my communities. So just want to say that.
All right. Okay, let's go on really fast to the projects and programs report.
In the interest of time, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Your activities report is in your agenda packets and you already had a presentation on 37, but I did want to bring one thing to your attention, and that is that the 116-121 project went out to bid today and that the bids are due on June 29th.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Executive Director, item 6.2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was an executive committee meeting earlier today. We talked through a couple of items that were on the agenda. And I also announced to the exec committee that I plan to retire by the end of the year. So I wanted to make you aware as well. I don't have a target end date, but sometime between October and the end of the year, I think will be it. And feels weird to say, but this is a great job and I love it very much. And it's a pleasure to work for this board and the boards that have gone before you. But I also think the organization's in a really great spot right now, fully staffed and running really smoothly. So I think the timing is good and I'm excited and couldn't be more proud of the team that we have here. They're great staff and yeah, so that's it. Go Warriors. I don't know.
So we will.
You stood up and go Warriors.
We need all the help we can get.
So what we will do at our next executive board meeting is walk through what the process is for getting a recruitment out there, working on what a brochure might look like in terms of that recruitment, and then bringing it as an item to the full board for discussion and really do an inclusive search. You can't replace somebody like Suzanne. I think we heard earlier that you were hired as the first employee in 1997, which means that she has outlasted everybody up to this point. And so we obviously want to capture as much of that institutional knowledge as we can before she selects a date. She announced that she was going to retire and the executive board's response was, what year? Seeing if we could keep her a little bit longer, but obviously I know the board will want to be really involved in that process moving forward. Are there any questions from the board or any comments? Director Bagby.
I was just thinking earlier that both David and Suzanne deserve our thanks for their leadership on Envision, on Highway 37 and so many other projects, and that just brought it home. So I guess I'll start. I don't want to start your farewell tour earlier, but I just do. I mean, I really was thinking of that earlier when we were discussing those projects, and it's so frustrating that it took so long to get, Caltrans attention on issues like that. And I think it underscores the importance of strong local leadership and that we really can. I don't know if we can move ocean level, but we can move mountains if we work together. And I just really wanted to thank you both for your leadership, and it's even more poignant now.
Right. Last item on our agenda is announcements from board members. I'll look to see if there are any announcements.
Who can top Suzanne?
Right. Drew, let's do public comment for item 6 on the agenda. That includes our reports.
no hands raised on public comment for these items, Chair Rogers.
Great. I'll bring it back and we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.